Yeah.
I don't know how much we want to delve into this, but I'm happy to go on. The DCC bylaw is the idea there is that as development occurs, the existing infrastructure in the village is not robust, sufficiently robust to accommodate that new development. You need bigger water pipes, you need more sewage treatment capacity, you need a wider road. So what the village does is comes up with a list of these projects and assigns values to them, and then looks 5 years out and says, how many development units are we going to likely build in that 5 years? And then divides the value of all of those projects by the number of development units that they think will occur. And that's how many DCC's dollar per unit that they're going to collect from people. Does that make any sense at all?
Except if you don't need, like if the only reason you need to have the bigger pipes and the $25 million work is because the developers want to build, and we already had a residential containment boundary that said none of this stuff would happen. The village doesn't really need it. The developers need it, which is why they have to pay for it.
I remember the mayor, who I'm not sure if he's here tonight.
Well, no, they usually don't come when the people are talking. They just come when the
What he said one day, what struck me and stuck with me, that was this. He said, when you're looking at the infrastructure requirements of this village, notwithstanding, completely independent of any future growth, it's daunting, it's onerous, it's huge. And so, you know, and I'm not trying to paint a gloomy picture, but let's face it, the infrastructure in this village is in trouble. And so it doesn't, you're right. But what he said, why not? It's completely irrelevant. Yes, it is. So if the existing infrastructure is in trouble and requires an immense cash infusion, where is that money going to come from if there is no future development?
But it's not going to come from this because
Yes, it
not very much of it, because the pipes that you have to put in are only going to be the pipes that are leading to your community. It's not going to be fixing pipes on other streets that have nothing to do with the main pipes that go down Cumberland Road and down Royston Road and up to Lot 9B and over to 10 and down to 2.
That's right.
And then you skip all of the ones that you have your septic on because you don't really need to have as many pipes going there. So it's not going to be fixing ones down on Allen or down on Penrith or any of those places. It's not going to be fixing that infrastructure. So because of the cost coming off of development cost charges, there isn't going to be a lot of leftover money to do any of that. People think there is, but there's not.
I think that if you look at the water system, for example, and you say, what do we need to do to bring this system up to standard? Right? You don't need to replace all the little pipes at every side street. You don't need to. You need to replace the big trunk mains that feed all those little ancillaries, right?
Well, no, I think going down Camp Road needs fixing, and on Allen needs fixing from what the village is telling us, but this isn't going to fix it.
Could you just explain what will be done with the, what are the plans for infrastructure with the money that's coming from Trilogy?
The plan is to replace the backbone of the system, essentially. And so, you know,
For
with
the whole
respect
of the
to
village, like the main that are coming down from
the
the
lake
base.
down and down Dunsbury and down Cumberland Road, those two backbone mains, those trunks require upgrading. And as I said earlier at the introduction here, the side benefit of that is that the fire flows that would be available to the rest of the population that already exists here be enhanced and brought up to the standard that the village has decided is necessary to achieve.
Will not the extra pressure and improvement in those main trunk mains put a great deal of extra pressure on the old pipes on the smaller roads?
Because the pressure is a function of the lake surface elevation, which is not going to change.
Right.
But what you've got is a tube this big down, you need a tube this big. And the frictional loss along that tube is what draws you know, if you have a long enough parking road, eventually the water won't come out the end, right? If you think about it. So if you need...
Can I just ask, if you dig wells on your property somewhere, is that going to be impacted by the level of the lake?
What Levelton has told us is that, and he has spoken at a previous public information meeting, they've done a lot of investigation on the subsurface aquifers that exist under Cumberland. And the thought is, quite frankly, that the capacity of these aquifers is immense. Right? And in fact, what happens is there's a huge gravel lens that that carries underneath this community. And essentially, Comox Lake drains and is connected to Maple Lake, and then drains down to the headwaters of Roy Creek and the Large Prissy as we know them. And the geology is such that there's a bedrock here, and this gravel lens comes up, and that's why the water pops out the surface there. But if you pop a hole in further up into the community here and get down into that gravel, the potential for water is essentially limitless, right?
But the Bell Group wants to build at least 14 six-story towers, and they don't want to connect to Cumberland's water. They also want a well into that aquifer. So I just wonder what kind of disjointed water system we're going to have, and if the people living here now are going to end up paying for the old part of town, and everybody else is going to be separate on separate systems.
I think that there's no way the village is going to accept a water well without an accredited and established hydrogeologist professional saying this thing is sustainable in perpetuity, and here's why. He's going to do the science necessary to prove to the village that you can draw water out of that hole forever, and there's so much coming down that hillside that it will not draw down. It's dissimilar to your well and my well, right, where you're in a little confined aquifer. We're talking about an immense aquifer.
They don't actually know.
But that said,
it goes all the way to Denver.
what I said earlier, and I want to repeat, is that Trilogy has no intention to drill any wells. Unless the village decides that that's where they want us to go. We're saying, we'll drill a well if you want us to. We'll wait for you to fix the dam if that's your preference. And we'll pay for either.
I have a question as to why a development like that will be placed in an ecologically sensitive area as opposed to we have a large big box store as opposed to some smaller individual residence developments.
I challenge you to find British Columbia that will tell you their neighborhood isn't an environmental sensitive area. The whole province is an environmental sensitive area, including where your house is located.
I think the other issue is that, particularly on Lot 5, what we've been doing is doing studies so that we can set aside sufficient area for protection of critical environmental areas, so that we've got the other areas for development. Over half this total acreage is set aside. You can see on that slide of 5, a significant part of that conservatively has been at the moment established that we would have to keep that back. The studies that are being done, testing the water, the levels, discussions with fisheries, will let us determine where that boundary is actually done. We've taken a very conservative view so that we're not planning more development than ultimately we'll be able to do. The areas where we've shown development are diagrammatic for how that will go. The market will dictate what that is and how the detailed planning goes. But the areas where we are showing development, like you say on Lot 5 or 6, are areas that will be outside and will be deemed suitable for development. So we're not going in and trying to change what are existing wetland or headland or headwaters into development sites. And one of the things that we've done is we've put the residential against, as a buffer against the more sensitive areas. And I should just remind you also, the site plans you see are conceptual. When we finally have the discussions with fisheries, when we've done our studies, when we've looked at that in full detail, that'll be all part of a detailed plan that will come once we've got the rezoning, before we submit for building permit, for environmental development permit, for development permits. They'll change and be a detailed assessment.
So that happens after
rezoning.
so people really have no input into it because you just deal with the village.
Well, but the regulators do, right?
Yeah.
What?
The regulators are...
And the village has, we've got the design, we've got the development permit. And the zoning basically establishes the uses and the density. It doesn't establish a plan, a site plan. And all we're showing you here is the extent of which we're doing the use, doing the density, how far we're developing, and those areas that we are working to set aside because of the environmental sensitivity nature.
pumping system.
What?
Online map there, it says 5 inches sewage pump system. Where does that fall in place?
I don't,
I can speak to that if you like.
Can speak to that.
Okay. Just to go back to your comment about how much detail I know, the thing that you need to realize is that rezoning only allows people to apply to develop. When you apply, that's when you need to make the detailed application that says this is what you plan. And that's when RAR kicks in. That's when the detailed nuts and bolts of what's going to be done can be reviewed by the agencies. This is a purely conceptual idea. This only provides the opportunity for developers to apply and then provide the details that create those answers. I'm not trying to evade you. The reason I don't know the answers is that we're not at that stage of development yet. What I can tell you about this development is it is about 50% green at the end of it. Developers that I've seen develop before would be shooting for 80 or 90. And it's a philosophical decision. When you ask about the bare minimum that's required is to protect fish and almost nothing else. The species at risk legislation is very, very, very minimal. No other wildlife are protected except for raptor nests. These people are setting aside almost half of this land on the basis that it would make a more environmentally sound development. There's no jiggery poker trying to hide stuff here. I think the developer here has the right to feel proud of this as a green development. I've been doing this for 35 years. I've never seen anybody do this. You guys are looking at people who are working to do this right. So,
but I have to say to you that there are many stream keepers from the Millard Piercy group here who have worked years to get the fish habitat right in that Millard Piercy system. And when they talk about environmentally sensitive land, they're not just looking at a parking lot and stamping it as that. They're people that have cared for years. And they have created the Millard Piercy plan. And the people that live in the rural areas surrounding this, they're our neighbors. And we have to take their concerns into account, whether they vote for the people here or not. It's very important that they have clear answers on the impacts to the place that they live.
my grandchildren are in the park. Okay? So, well,
No, I think we understand that issue, and we're obviously wanting to be sensitive to that. I mean, we are concerned about downstream outside of Cumberland property. I mean, it was very nice if they could just hook up to the water system and deal with that. And what we are looking at, I think, as Ian has indicated, in just the studies that we are undertaking, particularly looking at the hydrogeology, and when those studies are done, I think next public meeting, I'll bring Levelton here to talk a bit more about what's happening in the water. It's incredibly fascinating what he's discovering, and it's a very unique area. There is tons of water, not everywhere, but it's deep. And what we are looking to do, we have been part of this development for a long time, and so we're part of this community because of that. So we want to do it right, do it well, and use the best planning advice and technical advice that we can do. We're aware that we've got two particularly sensitive headwaters, and we intend to do them well. And they are part of an ongoing process of study. And I would just reinforce what Ross has said. We're not going to the approving authorities, fisheries, or whatever, and just saying, what do we have to do to comply to this? Because if that's the case, we would actually be developing a lot more than we are. And so we're wanting to take a big picture here and see what we can do that will maximize that. A solid environmental plan, frankly, is all part of a sustainable development and is also just good development these days. So we'll look at all those details. Well, excuse me, one question here, then you.
I think one of the issues is the deregulation, and right now local governments are being forced to uphold all these environmental protection requirements for these sensitive areas, whereas they don't have the capacity to actually do that, and it's not anything against local governments. The fact is there's just not the staff to deal with it. And upper governments are actually, they're terribly understaffed. So right now, zoning is the main tool to ensure that all these extras are put in, extras above the RIR, extras that will ensure protection of species at risk, and so on and so forth. So it seems like you're sort of putting the cart before the horse by doing all that after the zoning, because then you're relying on those regulatory agencies that are actually, they're no longer have the power to...
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Part of that, I should also note that as a condition of zoning, there will be a comprehensive development agreement appended to the zoning bylaw. And those are being prepared right now by the village and negotiated. They will enable the village to put criteria as conditions of zoning that would need to do certain appropriate things. And that's an opportunity where those things can be done. There are conditions that have to be met prior to any permits being issued. So those are some ways in which that can be handled by a particular municipality, even though the big picture is necessarily weak, and where you can expand the requirements. Yes?
We're talking about the big picture here, so I see the things that are not going to change, like the linkages you're talking about, the road systems, those are going to be needed access to the sites. I mean, the location and the size of the stores, that's got to be determined through development permit. Obviously, now the linkages I don't see any greenways or bicycle pathways or wildlife corridors. Are those should be considered at this point, should they not?
They are, and we haven't actually put everything up tonight that we have will be putting in. We have a bikeway plan is basically looking at on the arterials, the connections there. There are, if you look on our detailed plan, we're showing some indication of trails. We've got commitments, which again are in the comprehensive development agreement for lot 9B, where we're committing to a trail connecting the historic village to lands to the south, to our lots. The bulk of the trails will happen inside our specific development lots, and they will be developed when we actually do the detailed planning of those sites. So what we're looking at is a detailed network that will come together when we do those sites, because a lot of them will go through our sites. Others will be in the civic infrastructure and the civic rights of way. Wildlife corridors, we know where existing ones are. We're committed to the principle of trying to separate people and wildlife, and the corridors down, the buffers, the setback of the highway, and through some of these greenways will in fact handle that. What we actually want to do is to deflect some of the existing patterns, because they will bring people and wildlife in contact. So we will be developing those, and again, they are identified as conditions of permit approval that we have those put together. So we're just trying to give you an overview. Do you want to?
But that doesn't really make it comprehensive then, like, because you've already said these are just conceptual plans. You're going for rezoning, but all of these little pictures that we're seeing really don't mean anything, just a concept other than maybe where it's going to be.
It's a concept for how it's laid out in the details.
I know, but that's a major thing of what the zoning does is what is it going to look like? How many times you drive down there or walk down there and you're able to see them out?
Actually, the zoning just, and what these are illustrating is that they're setting the density and they're setting the uses.
Yeah, and our OCP said that the rezoning would end up being actually the actual comprehensive development agreement before the rezoning thing, so we would see all of that. It would actually be a comprehensive one. You're already saying this is going to take 20-some years. The age of the owner of Trilogy might not be alive in 20 years to be finishing it, and then you end up with something completely different if it's not actually written in stone.
Just to clarify, the comprehensive development agreement is a series of conditions. It's not plans attached.
It's in our OCP in the words. I asked the village why they didn't take it out. The last time we did an application on the OCP, but if they don't change all of the words in it, it's still in there.
And I think one of the things that concerns you is that the way the process is set up at the OCP establishment or amendments or at a zoning bylaw, there's lots of opportunity for public input. When you get to reviewing development permits, environmental permits, design guidelines, and the application of conditions in the comprehensive development agreement, it's often left to village staff.
Well, in our OCP, it said it would be left to the people, not
And
just
so
to the developers and staff.
that's an issue that, I mean, I recognize,
You want to see a team.
and not one that we understand that completely. Ross, do you want to just finish off, and then we can carry on with our questions? Infrastructure, sewer and water, before they'll give forth the reading, which of course is the key to having development proceed.
And then Trilogy doesn't want to proceed with any development until you get pre-approval or rezoning on all of these ones, right?
So if you didn't get
So we could
rezoning,
conceivably take all these lots through the third reading, receive third reading, and everything would sit there before fourth reading is given until the water and the sewer is being resolved. And that, of course, what the village engineer are working on right now.
What's the timeline?
Timeline, we hope they have resolution to that in the next 2 or 3 months. Trilogy have also been very active in assisting the village with the negotiations with the government to facilitate grants for this sort of work as well.
so if you don't get the approval on all of these lands here, then you would walk away from the ones that,
As I mentioned, we can't make a $25 million commitment to infrastructure without knowing that all the lots will be rezoned that will basically benefit from the infrastructure. Similarly, in terms of going out and getting tenants and development partners, we need to know that this is a comprehensive piece. So yes, unless we get everything, the development is at risk.
I have a question for Ross.
Ross.
Ross, hold on.
On the previous slide, the golf course, what have you found there so far in terms of animal use and sensitive species, and it's obviously a wildlife corridor, but what have you found there?
Well, there's certainly lots of wildlife sighting there. In terms of sensitive species, I don't believe we've identified anything that is protected in any way. We haven't seen any special bird nest or anything, but it certainly, there's a lot of deer sign in there. There's a lot of wildlife activity in there for sure. And by keeping it in this configuration, it will remain a wildlife sensitive or a wildlife friendly area.
But I've never seen a golf course that wasn't drenched in pesticides. How can you make that work? How can you reconcile that with being a sensitive area? A golf course and a sensitive area, in my mind, are a contradiction in terms.
There has been actually one Salt Spring Island that was pesticide-free, and I don't know all about it, but I know that they have done it. I mean, I don't golf.
I mean, that's part of the issues of choosing that form of development in a sensitive area. It may put constraints on the development.
But I thought the red-legged frogs and stuff in that part.
there's a lot in Saskatchewan that the golf course uses liquid waste and solid waste, and there's a solution to your sewage problems. You just put them on the golf course.
There's a lot of stuff happening around that.
It also has a lot of near surface groundwater, so it would tend to be naturally watered as well.
Was there other options that you looked at since the golf course?
We actually looked at a lot of options. That land is currently commercial in the OCP, and our feeling is this is really the appropriate use given that.
So what would be the zoning on this?
Recreational, commercial. Commercial would allow the clubhouse, it would be recreational.
I was zoned.
Excuse me?
I thought that those properties were not a part of the OCP. is zoned commercial. The upland development, I didn't think that we were considering that in the last OCP.
I will check that. You may be right. That may not have been in the OCP.
Yeah.
May not have been in the OCP.
It was left as working towards.
Yes, I think you're right, actually.
The zoning you're asking for is actually the zoning that Comox Valley is wanting to change to multi-family residential. That's where the golf course was supposed to go.
Yes.
My question is, you're asking for rezoning in terms of density. And I'm just wondering if the amount of green space is actually determined with the rezoning. I mean, clearly you're going to be selling most of these parcels. So is that green space then nailed down as part of the rezoning? Or then are we going to be renegotiating with the new owners in terms of where the buildings go and where the green space is and how much green space? So I guess I'm asking, is the green space that you guys are showing on these pictures, is that going to be at least the same percentage that a new owner will have to deal with, or are they going to, they get to do, yeah, is that clear?
I think that hasn't been completely sorted out. We anticipate that the CDAs will make reference to that. Again, CDA is a comprehensive development agreement. It's a legal agreement between the landowner and the village that gets appended to reference. It's part of the zoning bylaw.
So you're saying that in fact, the amount of green space that you're seeing will not necessarily be reflected in the final development.
But if you have an actual planner and a village staff and a village council that insists, I've seen ones that have been registered on subdivisions in Courtney and Comox, and it actually sets out exactly how they have to develop the greenways, how they have to develop any marshes or swamps that are there, and it's actually part of the CDA, and it actually gets registered against the title. These guys have been trying to get it, but it doesn't happen at that point, but it can.
The reason that we're having Ross doing a lot of work is it's going to culminate in agreements with fisheries, agreements out of the subsurface water hydrogeological work, and field surveys that will allow us to physically, in the field on each site, stake the areas, riparian areas, or the setback areas, the preserved areas, and survey them. So we're going on that basis on the assumption that if we have to post that plan as part of the CDA, we're prepared to do that.
But why not, instead of waiting for somebody to ask you to do that, why not volunteer?
We are doing it.
Well, you just said if you're asked to do it, we'll do it, but you didn't say you volunteer to actually do it. And as a good neighbor, since you said you're going to be our neighbor, then you need to start doing some of those volunteering stuff instead of making people ask you to do it. That would make a big difference.
This parcel is going to get rezoned. You're asking for rezoning to recreational. Can you give us a list of other, now it might not necessarily be a golf course, that is one of the options on that zoning, right? What other things could occur on that zoning?
Recreational, you probably could do maybe a riding stable.
Like a horse track?
Equestrian. I'm not sure what the village, I don't know if anyone knows, I haven't got the
Campsites?
the scope of residential or recreational in the village's bylaws. The village bylaws that are set up now are very limited. There's a couple of commercial zones and a few residential zones. So we're actually making new bylaws for each of our sites here.
I don't think there is actually a zoning for commercial, recreational, commercial.
I haven't
Yeah,
seen
there
one.
is just designated in the OCP, but it
But
wasn't.
the intent would be basically recreational use, but not parkland or greenway, that sort of thing. So, I mean, golf course you think of, you'd think the BMX track would go into a zone like that. An equestrian.
It's kind of far from downtown.
What about an RV campground?
A campground. Presumably you could do that in a recreational one.